Guys, I'm extremely hungry. Let's get to the ordering. Carl, you've done wonders this time, buddy. And I never thought you'd come through with some stuff from down under, but I'm looking at that duck-billed platypus, and I think I'm going to have one of those things. I don't know if it's going to taste like duck, but it's sure going to taste good to me. Mike?
Well, he says the tree sloth is pretty good too. So.
Tree sloth. Well, there's too much fungus on the back.
No, you got to take the claws. You know, cut the kind of like the lobster claws or crab claws. Get that marrow out of there.
Yummy. I'm not sure I'm ready for that.
Tree sloth marrow. I'll have some water. I think. Just keep it to liquid today.
Oh boy, oh boy.
Anyway, well, most of these lunches we always kind of get in, talk a little bit about libertarianism or sometimes a lot about libertarianism, but we never really have gone at it like directly, the nature of the whole political movement and the philosophy behind it. And I thought maybe today we could just kind of explore that. Because a lot of people don't realize that even within the libertarian movement, there's some fairly distinct differences.
Perhaps factions, even.
Well, I guess you could call it factions, yeah. But I mean, I think in general, we would agree that libertarianism as a political philosophy is a philosophy that agrees that it is always wrong to initiate the use of force, and we all agree on that. But how we implement that through the mechanism of government or no government is where we sometimes diverge. And we have Anarchist Prime here, and who certainly represents the Anarchy Prime, right? The anarchy point of view, and I very much adhere to a pretty much classical Jeffersonian limited government point of view, which has its problems.
Now, do you believe in having sex with slaves as well, or is that not part of your Jeffersonianism?
I believe all acts should be consensual.
The sex thing is good, but the slave thing is bad.
It's hard to consider that someone who is considered property, that it could be consensual. So I guess there would be some difficulties there. But,
all right, well,
removing that, if what can I say?
You really
racked my train of thought.
Thinking about sex all of a sudden now. The show's going downhill.
Yeah, was that in the discussion with the
Cyber Babe?
The group the other day.
Don't talk about
was that before the show or during the show that came up? I forget.
Yeah. It was in when we were talking with the folks from the NAACP.
Right.
That in word, most of us would agree with him, but indeed the guy was all over the map.
Right. No, but well, never mind. So anyway, it's a matter of how you implement the mechanisms to allow people to protect their own freedom. That's essentially the way I see the question, and so I'm going to kind of turn it over to you to explain the anarchist point of view. But the thing I want to say first is that when most people think of anarchy or anarchism, they typically think of it in kind of a left-wing mode, the Sacco Vanzetti sort of thing, where people were terrorists and they wanted to kind of bring down society and they wanted to create disorder for disorder's sake. Yeah. And this is a whole different, this is really, in that sense, it isn't anarchy. It's spontaneous order in that sense, right?
Notice how Mike stressed the order, spontaneous order.
Right. Well,
there is an order. Just like when people talk about law of the jungle. There is no government in the jungle, but people constantly refer to the law of the jungle. But that implies, though, that there is a law, there is an order.
Right.
In absence of any central authority.
The anarchist position.
Well, I mean, I guess first is that even the whole term is pretty loaded, like you say, and it can mean a lot of things. A lot of people take it to mean things. I would hardly tell people, except in a group of libertarians, that I'm an anarchist, because generally people say, well, what do you mean by that? You spend a lot of time explaining and talking about the word. I mean, technically a more accurate description might be anarcho-capitalist.
That's meaning in the early 70s when I started reading about it, that's the way it was always described.
Yeah, because basically, and I think that that kind of helps to differentiate things from the from the leftist anarchists who just say, well, we want to bring everything down, and hey, if we need what you have, then we take it. Well, that's obviously not a very good way to get along, and seeing as how I have things that I kind of like, I don't want that to be, I wouldn't want that to be the rule, that, I have to constantly, have a bigger gun than the guy next to me. I'd like to have some kind of a, some sort of a knowledge that when, that there's a system in place that I can use to ensure that my...
But what would the system be in an anarcho-capitalist regime?
Like one of the things that David Friedman, Milton's younger radical son,
yes, the black sheep of the family,
would say, is that a lot of people pretend, when you say the term anarchy, they say, well, you just you don't want anything, you don't want any kind of order, and he would say that anarchists indeed want we want police, and we want ways to resolve our disputes. We want I want good roads. It's just that it's the means by which those things are implemented that I disagree with. I don't want the government to do them. I don't want any central authority to do that. I think that the more individual choice in any matter, the better off. I mean, just like as we say, more competition is good. If there's one company that's providing a service, chances are that service isn't going to be as good as if there were several competing firms. Well, I would argue that the same exact services that the government now offers would all be improved if we had many competing people doing them. Yeah, roads would be better, I think, undoubtedly. Schools would certainly be better. Yeah, and then these are areas where, whereas libertarians, we all think, there's the minor difference between what they might call the minarchist position or the anarchist position within libertarian schools is, do we have a government at the federal level that's maybe a tenth of the size of it as today? Or do we have a government that's zero? Yeah, well, that's just, so our disagreements are fairly minor when you look at it in the as far as what differentiates an anarchist from a Republican or an anarchist from a Democrat.
Right.
The difference between an anarchist and a minarchist or a traditional libertarian who wants some amount of government is fairly small. I think the difference is basically, do you want to have just some semblance of control centralized where one group, the government, is given the sole ability to initiate or to control the use of force.
So that's like a court system, or
somebody that would set up the court, set up the police, set up the laws. And a lot of people say, well, you just couldn't have laws. You couldn't have just lots of different private law, where one company sold law and you contracted and said, well, I subscribe to this set of laws, and when I have disputes with my neighbors, I'm going to try and get into the court that that sees the rules as this. And people say, well, that would never work. You'd have different law, in arbitrary places. And I say, well, kind of like you mean when you go from township to township, or county to county, or state to state, I mean, we have that right now. We have completely arbitrary. And it's based on an outmoded idea that geography was the way to eliminate those things as the boundaries. Whereas, today, I mean, we have so many things that cross boundaries. I mean, most of the people I contract with in the future may well be people that I never see. I may contract and do a lot of my work via the internet. And it's a fairly borderless thing. So I want to make sure that the people I deal with are on the same terms. Similar, I mean, I just basically want to have a good way to have contracts and resolve those disputes. And I would argue that government isn't the most efficient way to do that.
So a lot of companies, a lot of companies already do stuff like this when they use outside arbitration and stuff, right? Instead of using a legal system.
Yeah, they already recognize that our court systems are overclogged and overburdened, and not the best way to resolve their simple disputes.
Well, I guess.
So who contracts with or who establishes and pays for the police, and the legal and judges, etc. Or do you not? Or is everything strictly private? And why would a policeman then protect someone?
Because I paid him. I mean, instead of everybody kicking into a large pool.
So you'd only get protection if you paid for it?
No, not necessarily.
Somebody would have to pay for the service. Now, your pocket would not be picked to pay for police service for someone else that didn't pay for it. Now,
right. Okay.
Some people say, oh, well, that leaves the poor at a disadvantage. Right. I would argue that the reason we have so many poor is because of government policies that stifle economic growth and keep people from being able to contract and make their own way. So in a system with much less government or no government, we would have much less problem with people that were poor. Services wouldn't cost ridiculous amounts.
Too, the poor aren't totally without resources, and if they actually had control over the services, however modest they might provide, I suspect they might feel a little more the customer than the victim.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't think most of the poor community, the disadvantaged community, feels they end up paying some for police and government, and I'll bet most of them don't think they're getting anything back for their
certainly
buck,
not the people in Los Angeles.
Well, see, and they're the ones.
I can imagine they would be much happier with no police of any stripe.
Well, they are the ones a lot of times who set up their own basic policing. Community watches
policing,
and stuff. They do it on their own without the government.
The Angels in New York. I mean, that whole thing.
That was
Guardian Angels.
I think they're in both.
That was kind of a
several big
spontaneous
cities.
thing in response to the fact that the police weren't really
there.
there and doing enough.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing.
Yeah. And some of the things that they want to enforce probably aren't the things that we all want to enforce, but the point is that you would pay people to protect the things that you need protecting.
Would you have a constitution?
A constitution for what?
Well, that's what I'm trying to establish.
A constitution establishes a government.
Well, he doesn't have a government. So.
If there's not a government, I would have agreements and I would have contracts with the people that I wanted to do business with. If I wanted to hire a police service,
right,
I would hire. And so basically, I mean, if you want to call them small, the Constitution is basically a contract. It's a contract drawn up by a bunch of people that's supposed to apply to everyone, whether we've signed it or not. Now, to me, that's a flawed analogy. I mean, there's just no way that I can't feel bound to the terms of the Constitution. Obviously, our congressmen don't. Why should I? I mean, it was I never signed it. My parents never signed it. No one I know ever signed the Constitution.
No,
a very limited handful of people signed the Constitution. So how it could possibly be a legally binding document on anyone is beyond me. I mean, it seems absolutely crazy.
It's a good reference point. Without it, we would have nothing to hold up against.
Only in a relative context.
That's all I'm saying. Imagine how controlled we'd be if we didn't have the Bill of Rights. Well,
certainly, if you establish a government and say it can do anything that the people want, then you have an out-and-out democracy, and then, the results are catastrophic. Now, even with the Constitution that severely limited our government, we find ourselves in a position where the government routinely violates the Constitution. It's definitely many, many, many times the size that the people that wrote the Constitution felt it would be. Now, there were the anti-federalists of the day, and they knew. They a lot of time talked about a lot of the same problems that we were going to have with the growing federal government. And many of the people that were revolutionaries that fought so hard to get their freedom and independence from Britain actually turned out to be against the ratification of our current Constitution. They felt it granted too much power to the federal government. And I would agree. I would tend to agree that, I think we should have, maybe fixed some of the holes that were available in the Articles of Confederation, but we should have tried to fix them without growing the federal government into the beast that it became.
We wouldn't have had a civil war, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, one thing, this is about anarchy or libertarianism, and Mike said
or limited government. Anarchy or libertarianism isn't the dichotomy.
This is a totally different thing. It's like, they're almost like something to live by. Don't count on somebody else to give you things. You have to work for them, and either the libertarians want that and anarchists. It's not. We're not going to say.
Don't make a difference between he's a libertarian,
right, in
my view, anyway. It's just that we have a slightly different way of getting to the end. The means are slightly different.
Yeah, the libertarianism is basically a description of how. The state where individuals can all be free to maximize their own potentials.
But the point
we enable that.
The point I was trying to make is any of us we want to make it that people are responsible for themselves, that they take care of their own actions.
Well, we don't want to make it. We want to
teach them.
We want to arrange. I guess we want to arrange our affairs that we all buy into the non-coercion principle. Mm-hmm. That's essentially the way in which we'll arrange our contracts and our affairs, and if we have government, our government.
Mm-hmm. To me, the main issues aren't. It's not a matter of is an anarchist against the National Endowment for the Arts and the other libertarians aren't. Well, you're not going to find a libertarian that says I support the National Endowment for the Arts. Maybe if it's a private company, maybe I might throw a couple dollars that way if they do things that are useful. But as a government institution, of course not. None of us. So the main difference with someone who's a limited government libertarian and someone who's a no government libertarian would be: do we retain a federal system of courts? Do we retain the Constitution?
Well, and wait a minute. It really has nothing to do with federal. Let me jump in on the limited government point of view. When I took my political science courses, I mean, I think I was very influenced in great part. I might have been an anarchist if I hadn't. But the very definition of government that makes it different from everything else in terms of classic political science, as I was taught, is that government is the only institution that has the right to use force. No other institution in society has the right to use force. And that in the classic sense, then, declaration, governments are instituted among men to protect the rights that men have, which I guess he meant men and women eventually, and all men eventually, but that that government only derived its right to use force from our right to use self-defense, because I don't have the right to initiate force against you, but I have the right to defend myself if you initiate it against me. And that's where government, in the limited sense, gets its right to kill people, gets its right to steal other people's money. Well, because if you take my property and the government on my behalf takes my property back, they're stealing my property from you in a sense. They're taking it from you by force. I mean, they're right to do so in that sense, but they're still taking it from you.
Yeah, but they stole your taxes to do that.
Well, put that aside for a moment. I mean, I've empowered an agent called my county government or my state government to act on my behalf. Presumably, they're a little more objective than I would be, taking the law into the hands myself. Now, you're saying you could employ a private agency to do the same thing.
Yeah, because what if I don't find them to be objective? What if I think their criteria are just absolutely atrocious, and I say, well, I don't want to pay. I don't want to kick into that, and I don't want them to exist.
The idea is that if you're going to empower anybody to have the right to use force in any given area, I guess it's more or less geographic, that we fear that right of the government to use force so much that we try and make it subject to the will of the entire community, and that this check is necessary. That if in your county here, if there could be 1,000 organizations that had the right to use force under certain circumstances in some socially acceptable context, that we empower private organizations to use force to go arrest people, to go shoot people ultimately, if that's necessary to protect somebody's property or life. Well, I mean, if somebody's trying to break into your house and you call the private security force, right, to come protect your house, or the alarm goes off and they just show up, presumably, if necessary to protect you, they ought to have the right to use deadly force.
Well, they should have. They have the same right to use force that you would.
Right.
You've basically authorized them to protect your property. Right. So, I mean, if I assume, and the state doesn't necessarily see this my way, but as far as I'm concerned, if someone breaks into my house, I'm going to assume that their intentions are to harm me and my property, and I will use the force that I find necessary, which may well be deadly force, because I'm not going to think, do I want to take my time and really place this shot so I just sort of hit him in the leg and knock him down? Or do I just, in the heat of the moment, boom, 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 shoot him 3 times, spray a bunch of lead, and, clean up the mess later?
Well, if you had 15 rounds in your magazine, you'd probably pull off 12 or 13 of them, right?
When the person was in my house, yes. If I chased them, down there,
and you have a
no, because they're in my house. That's a well thought out in advance.
I'm making another point.
I know you're talking about the analogy of the cops, shooting, that unarmed citizen up in New York.
Yeah.
Well, now the difference is that they chased him. They weren't on someone else's property.
At that point, because they shouldn't have been there. Once it's there, maybe it's a different matter. But
but I mean, it doesn't matter. I don't think anyone has to necessarily be authorized to use that force, other than my authorization. You have the authorization from me to use force to protect my stuff.
Okay.
So you have the same exact right to to defend my stuff as I have to defend my things.
Okay. So if I steal your property and you weren't there at the time, and or I kidnap somebody in your family, right? So you're going to authorize your agency, or call them up because you've already authorized them to some extent by the fact that they're they're kind of on the payroll, to go resolve this matter for you, right? So where's the limit on their right to use force to redress that? I mean, they're going to to file a complaint with the court? Are they going to just
they're going to approach someone. Yeah, if they have reason to believe now, they got to have reason to believe that someone's because they can't just go. They don't just make stuff up. I mean, they're not the LAPD. they don't just make up
evidence.
Yeah. They don't just create evidence, against any person.
Well,
they want to actually. Well, see, because their motivation is to get you your things back, because that's the only way they get money.
Their motivation is going to be to make money.
Well, their motivation is to make money. How do they make money? They make money
by not getting sued.
They make money by convincing you that their services are worthwhile. Your services aren't worthwhile. If I've paid you to protect me and my family and you fail to do so, well, I'm probably not going to keep paying you.
Okay, so one of your loved ones is held hostage.
Some of them's held hostage, right? Okay, now, and we know, and we have reason to believe who did it. Say they sent a note. Right. They sent a note, give us $1 million, or we're going to kill that person.
They haven't violated anybody's rights in the process, and they know that
they're going to find out.
Crawford is holding,
They say, all right. Well, here's They say there's a person. And we know where they're at.
Right.
We know where they're at now. As a protection agency, they're probably going to their first thought will be, well, look, if we just busted into this guy's door, he might have his own protection agency, and they may well shoot at us, which is a very negative.
A lot like
it sounds negative. It sounds expensive. Well, but it sounds very expensive. If we go in and blast a bunch of bullets, and then they blast a bunch of bullets, have we gotten anywhere? Have we actually done anything for our customers other than risk our own lives? And you start to see that
you blasted off a little bit of a testosterone surge.
Well, yeah. So if you're only hiring people that actually want to, blast away and act like testosterone-filled junk, those people need to go into hockey.
They'll be,
they don't need to be on police. We don't need the biggest, machoist, fastest shooting guys on the police force. We want people that think. We want people that know how to resolve disputes.
So is the DEA filled with ex-hockey players?
There are people that definitely ought to have a stick taken to them. Yes.
Yeah. You want people who think to a point, but you want people who are trained and who, when they're in a situation that requires deadly force, are able to do it. Essentially more on instinct than without thinking.
Well, certainly, yeah. We're not going to have a bunch of Gandhis on our police force, who walk around and say, boy, I'd like to stop or I'll sit and protest, that kind of thing. Obviously, there is a certain amount, but we don't necessarily want the, the macho gung-ho attitude that we, shoot first, ask questions later. That doesn't get anybody anywhere, because then, it's expensive, especially if you're an organization that has to pay for the consequences. So,
his protection
chances
force is
are,
there and your protection force is there.
Chances are they're going to say, look, we have reason to believe that your client has kidnapped someone. Now we're going to need to find a way to get this to resolve this. We just want to make our client happy, and obviously they want to do the same.
You're showing your hand by then, and they're going to hide this person. Even
the protection agency will.
No. The client. The
client may well try and hide the person. Well, they're going to try and do that anyway. Obviously.
No, but when they're signaled that you actually are suspecting them, they're even going to redouble their efforts.
In our little hypothetical, we were assuming that person already contacted us and said, hey, we've.
But typically,
in Esmeralda, give me $20,000.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we do have some idea already who we're dealing with.
Typically that's not what you want.
Maybe they don't have a protection agency. It's just
maybe they have. Okay, maybe well, then they have no protection agency.
They have their own.
All right. So if they have absolutely no protection other than their own, then they've signaled that, look, I want to live in a world where my freedom depends on my own firepower. Mm-hmm. And of course, if you want to live like that, your best bet is to not piss other people off by kidnapping them or taking their property, because otherwise people tend to get angry and they come after you. So you're a man who says, well, I need no stinking protection. I've got my AK or whatever it is, and I've just kidnapped someone. Well, chances are you're going to see a group of people that I paid coming in your door, and they're going to have a nasty problem. Their goal isn't to shoot you and kill you. Their goal is to get my stuff back. If you happen to shoot at them on the way in, well, hey, they might shoot back.
Right.
Tough.
So they're in effect responding on your behalf and using deadly force if necessary to achieve an end commensurate with the use of force.
Yeah. Well, so in a worst case scenario, you have the same thing that goes on in today's system, where basically in a worst case scenario, the cops kick down the door and they shoot the suspect. That's what happens in a worst case scenario. In a best case scenario, the two sides, protection agencies, would come to some resolution and say, look, maybe it's something more like a theft, where we have videotape of your client stealing my client's TV. All we want to do is go in and get the TV. You could even go in and bring it out. That protection agency, they don't want to be in the business of protecting known thieves, because then people won't be paying them. So they have a very high, the thieves or a suspected thieves protection agency also has its own motivation to make sure that person
has the deterrence? If all he's given up is, hey, they caught me, take the TV back.
Well, no,
He's going to keep going out there and trying to steal more TVs.
But you got to pay for the time of all the people, the protection agents that came in there.
Oh, okay.
You got to pay. You're probably going to have to pay something extra. Your protection agency might even drop you. They might say, you're a thief. We're not going to give you insurance to go out and steal, so we're just dropping you now.
So there's no incarceration.
It depends. It depends. Well, I don't believe in punishment for the sake of punishment. I mean, right now, our current system, if you get caught stealing someone's TV, you pay the state a bunch of fines and you sit in jail, and I have to pay for it.
Right.
Meanwhile, I don't have my TV.
You don't get your TV.
Do you go to jail?
All I want's my TV.
Do you go to jail for stealing a TV?
Well, probably not the first time. No,
Yeah,
no. We're going to give you. We'll give you a bunch of tries before that even. Yeah.
4 or 5.
Even still, you still go through the criminal justice system, but who pays for that? Not the guy who stole the TV. I mean,
Right.
I
agree that
the person who the primary motivation of anyone when I lose my TV, my primary goal is to get my TV back. I don't want to pay for the process. If I have to pay extra, to have my protection agents go out and kick this guy's door in or knock on the door and ask, and deal with the other protection. Well, fine. I don't mind. Now, when you catch the guy, make him pay for that. Now,
Okay.
if he says, hey man, here's the TV, but I don't have any money.
Yeah.
Well, all right. Well, we'll put you to work.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't have any problem with that at all, and I don't think that he has any.
So reimbursement's big
the
on
act
your
of
list.
stealing a TV, people always say, well, what about his rights? What about his inherent rights? To me, he's signaled by stealing the TV that he doesn't have respect for property and respect for rights. Therefore, he's in no position to complain about his rights. No one would be stepping on your rights if you hadn't initiated force and stole other people's property. So it's too late to start complaining. Shut up and take it.
Okay.
It's that simple. I mean,
Plus
generally, you're not going to have a problem if you're not a thief.
The whole anarchy view is almost like, society. There's still going to be a society. They could shun that person. They could not associate.
Most people
might
don't
not
want murderers.
They wouldn't sell him things. They wouldn't. However it would work.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of like
certainly a protection agency. They wouldn't be in a position to harboring known fugitives. Now maybe there would be one. Maybe they'd say, well, we're going to set up one. It's kind of like a mafia, and we'll just protect you no matter what.
I was thinking of a protection agency like the mafia.
Yeah,
okay,
that's
well,
defense
fine.
attorneys.
Now, are there more of those people than there are people that? Can you generate more income protecting thieves or protecting the innocent? Mm-hmm. I say, when you look at the numbers, there's a lot more people who actually just have property and want to keep it than want to steal other people's property. And generally, people that want to steal other people's property probably aren't going to be paying the protection agency very well either because they're thieves. They're not real big on paying for service, or they'd have bought their own TV. So, I think there's more money to be made by offering protection to people that just want to mind their own business, and they don't mind respecting the rights of others and the property of others. So I think the numbers add up. Now, I mean, would it all fall magically into place if the government just said, well, we're closing up shop tomorrow, there is no law? Probably not. It would eventually. It would just take quite a while to fall into the right groove because there would be a lot of people that would say, hey, man, there's absolutely no one to stop me. Now, if the government sold off the things it does in pieces. I mean, first we've got to get back to the Constitution before we can go anywhere. Once we're back to that,
1800.
Yeah, when the federal budget is a couple $100 billion.
You might want the Constitution, say, with the Emancipation.
Well, I didn't mean in that respect, but I'm thinking like second President John Adams, the Alien Sedition Acts. I mean, they were going down.
Well, George Washington, was sending troops to quell tax rebellers. So, do we really want to? I mean, we have to go back to what the Constitution says, not the way it was ever enacted, because the Constitution was never enforced. People say, well, how did we stray? I think Peter McWilliams in the Ain't Nobody's Business If You Do says, after he outlines all the Bill of Rights and talks about all the freedom and what it means and what the people that wrote it said it meant, and says, well, my God, how did we get from here to there? He says, the answer is we were never there. This was always a pie-in-the-sky dream of having a government that lived by the Constitution. It never happened. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was certainly a lot smaller. Took them a while to think of all the things to do.
From the get-go, and then railroads and, all sorts of government subsidies, on a smaller scale compared to today early on, but almost from the very beginning.
Yeah, so we never really had that concept.
Well, the idea of the post office, written into the Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
They thought it was a public good, and so they established this government business.
My pal Lysander Spooner was a real big thorn in the side of that. Started up his own mail carrying route until they, of course, shut that down and forced him to shut that down. But I mean, and he was just an abolitionist during the Civil War. And one of the things that he stated with respect to the Constitution, he wrote a thing called the Constitution, or the Constitution of No Authority, No Treason, I guess was this one. No Treason was like a series, and then one of the sections was the Constitution and No Authority. I think I have that right. But after he spent about 20 pages from a legal standpoint shooting holes in the idea that the Constitution is a valid contract for anyone, let alone even the people that signed it. It probably wouldn't hold muster. At the end of it, he said, whether the Constitution is one thing or whether it is another, this much is certain, that it has either authorized the government that we have had, or it has been powerless to prevent it. And in either case, it's unfit to exist. And I find that to be, that's quite an indictment. I mean, that's true. I mean, either the Constitution works and we should have limited government, or it doesn't work. In which case, we need to change it, or perhaps get rid of it. Just recognize that you can't chain government down. Government is a beast that always grows, and the less of it, I see it as a cancer.
A cancer upon our nation.
Yeah.
Yeah, but focusing just on the federal government, I mean, that's one entity, but you got all these 50 other kind of semi-sovereign entities, and then within them, it's a huge behemoth. Something like over 500,000 elected officials across the country, and then you consider the bureaucracy under that. I mean, it's.
But I have a hard time figuring out with what Todd's describing how his setup would be really all that much different than the Wild West, at least as portrayed in popular culture.
As portrayed in popular culture now, is that an accurate representation of it?
It's like
was every day a gun battle in the Wild West? And if so, why did people move there?
I was telling Crawford the other day that in Rome, when they fed the Christians to the lions, and the gladiators fought and whether you're going to let them live or not, when the Romans went like that meant kill them. When the Romans went like that meant, save them, right? The exact opposite of what's played in the movies, but the idea of thumbs up and thumbs down is such a socially embedded idea that movies changed it to exactly the opposite so people would understand. And, the Wild West, all the movies in the 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s were really Hollywood's version of what they thought the West
they were all
was.
filmed in Italy, weren't they?
That's
all the Clint's early
That was
movies.
the good stuff, the Clint spaghetti stuff. But how did people acquire property in the Wild West? I mean, I think it's perfectly reasonable to think at that point that there were a lot of favors, payoffs, using government and force.
The government gave it to the railroads, and the railroads sold it off to. That was
in different places. But, and in Oklahoma, they just let people, here,
they had the land.
Go, and basically, you carved out your own section, made improvements to it, and and that's how you get your.
They kind of performed a somewhat classic role of creating property in that sense that they, you had essentially undeveloped property, except that it belonged to the Indians, but we'll just forget
dismiss
that
issue.
And then they brought it into the idea of property by dividing it up and letting people settle on it, and that was a mechanism for doing that.
Before the government, you would know more because you read books about different things.
You were around back then, right?
Yeah, you were around back then, Mike. But,
I knew Wild Bill.
But there were a lot of the settlers were actually buying from the Indians before the government came in and started just killing them off.
Well,
because they couldn't sell the land
in the East when the Indians still had somewhat of a parity with the new settlers. I mean, there were a lot of examples where the Europeans settled peacefully in areas. There are a lot of examples where they didn't. Like they bought Manhattan for a cheap price, right? But that was done peacefully. And I think there are a lot of examples like that, but then there's too many examples. Once you start getting big groups of people with governments, and they have all this power at their disposal, then it's like our foreign policy today. It's just too easy to use that power.
Why not just take it? They all laughed at Jefferson for the Louisiana Purchase and said, why don't you just take it? The French aren't going to put up a fight. The Indians might. Perhaps you ought to, I think his response was that it was just uncivilized to just take the land. He thought it was much more civilized to buy it, which sounds good on the surface.
To buy stolen land.
Why not buy it from the owners? You've got the right idea, Tom, but just, think
One
a little
step
harder.
removed.
You're buying it from the wrong people.
He just got done writing in the Constitution that they were savages, and what else did they say? Not in the Constitution, in the Declaration. I mean, it's a really Indian racist document in a lot of ways, describing how savage these people were and how they deserved to be, slaughtered.
But it's much more civilized to be a slaveholder in or be having coerced sex with one of your...
Well, the civilized part comes from wearing the wig, you know, and walking like you have a stick up your butt. You feel civilized. I mean, it's just, you know, yeah.
But in your model, I mean, I think it's still possible to have a rather coercive element exist. I mean, it still is. I mean, the guy with the biggest gun can still win in pockets.
There's no guarantee that someone can't try and take your freedom or my freedom.
Succeed,
no, I think that the odds are low. I mean, the way I look at it, in the worst case scenario, we end up with an oppressive organization like we have now that's the government.
Right.
That's the worst case scenario. You've got a lot of economic factors against that because most people aren't going to pay willingly to oppress themselves. I don't think. I mean, you know, it takes an awful lot of convincing to try and get people to, you know, to go along with their own oppression.
But I could imagine, I mean...
But you could imagine,
as what happens in currently perhaps in Russia, I mean, certainly they're using government to assist in their effort, but those little pockets of mini... I don't know what you want to call them, gangs, thugs, whatever. I mean, they are able to use coercive force and exist for long periods of time and get away with it. In essence.
There is no because what happened was the government broke down. Yeah, they don't allow other people to set up, you know, their own protection agencies. The gangs do it. They say, well, we can use whatever force we want because no one's going to stop us. Now, if you wanted to set up a shop and say, look, you know, give me your money and I will protect you.
But why couldn't it just end up that you'd have multiple gangs in essence?
Well, who's paying these gangs? Well, who's paying these gangs?
Oh,
what are we? You know, what are they trying to go for? What are they fighting over?
All we would want.
So armed gangs are going to just start cleaning out, you know, and they're just going to start kicking people out of their houses and.
Well, whatever. They don't have to be kicking people out of their houses. They could be going for their TVs and jewelry, though.
So you just have lots of home invasions. Well, as they do now.
Yes.
You have that like in England right now. I mean, I would suggest that most people would have a very strong motivation to protect their own things. I would suggest that we allow more gun ownership, not less.
Oh, absolutely.
And so, you know, when an armed thug wants to kick my door in, I would bet that, you know, if unfettered by government, I could have enough firepower to stop them. Certainly. Now, not everybody would, but now if you're an armed thug, how do you figure out which house you can kick in the door safely and which house gets you blown into pieces? You know, every 10th house, there might be a real angry homeowner who doesn't have a lot to do other than sit around and he's worried about armed gangs. Exactly. And so all of a sudden he's an armed gang himself. You know, but so the odds of it aren't that great. I mean, just as you can imagine and envision a society without government that leads to armed gangs, I can imagine, you know, in a good dream, a society with government that works perfectly and respects people's rights. But in theory and in practice, they're just two different things. I mean, you know, if government work, if we want to compare the reality of government to the, you know, to the reality of no government, we have to take a lot of, you know, look at what actually goes on when, you know, in absence of government, wherever, you know, in the places we can. We have to look at, you know, where people have motivation and incentive to do things, and most people want to have their own property. I mean, most people
I understand. Most people do want
that,
but most people, or maybe many people, want other people's property too. I mean, that seems to be kind of the history of mankind, from tribal society on up to what we have right now. I mean, that's what a lot of wars are fought.
But most people that want other people's property don't want to actually go take the property themselves. They're happy if they can say to their government agent, "Go take that guy's property and divide it up among us." Yeah, damn right it does. People maybe they're not inherently ethical in that they don't, you know, that they respect everyone else's property, but they're certainly, for the most part, a little too lazy to go out and take it. Right. I mean, you know, you're not going to risk your life to take my TV, because that's what you would be in fact doing. You know, you could kick my door in and think, I'm just going to walk in and take this guy's TV, but I may well shoot you. You may well end up dead, and a TV's probably not worth that.
But if the guy you paid for it says BATF on the back, you know, you pay him to do that, you say, well, he probably deserved it, you know.
Well, and certainly eminent domain, which sounds a lot like what you were saying, was using government as the agent of force to grab your property and then divvy it up, ostensibly under the fair market value principle.
If it was a fair market value, someone would offer and you would sell.
Yeah, exactly.
That's fair market value. I mean, you know, the price at which you would voluntarily sell.
But, you know, there have been examples, even in our own history. Carl mentioned, you know, there's a lot of kind of private courts in the sense of arbitration and things like that go on. But like bounty hunters, I mean, there's a pretty long tradition. They still exist, although they're, I think, severely regulated now, where, you know, in some limited sense, they're exercising some of that kind of police investigation, arrest sort of authority. And I'm sure a lot of police will say there's all sorts of problems with that. But
there are.
Just as we'll say, there's a lot of problems with Los Angeles police.
Yeah.
But I do think that as maybe a comparatively more moderate libertarian, there are a lot of things that we can try to, like expanding the idea of the bounty hunter concept into full-fledged.
Would you be a bounty hunter, Mike? Would you like wearing the tight-fitting clothing with arm to the hilt?
See, I mean,
unleashing testosterone wherever you dare
white
go.
like a stormtrooper.
I'm not. I wouldn't jump out of a plane for the thrill and excitement of doing that, or I wouldn't jump off a bridge with a bungee cord strapped to my feet. Those sort of thrills don't really, I've been on roller coasters. Some people really just get the rush of that sort of environment.
Right,
and
the adrenaline rush.
I wouldn't. I mean, I'm much more comfortable with my editing system and my computer, whatever.
Things you can control.
Things I can control.
Exactly.
Right, exactly.
That's exactly what it is. The loss of control doesn't do much for you.
Right. Yeah. The idea.
Boy, this would be great if I could control it.
Yeah. The idea that somebody might shoot me doing my job is a scary thought. But
so, Mike, we heard a lot about Lysander Spoonerful's wonderful universe here. What do you think? Where do you come down on all of this? I mean, how much government would you have?
Well, I guess where I come down is that the practical side of me has difficulty imagining the society that Todd envisions, but in my heart, I'd give it a serious try, and I'd certainly try some things seriously to demonstrate that it would work. I think the problem with, if you have difficulty really getting me to jump in with 4 feet, the typical citizen who is indoctrinated with a government I'll do for you mentality, has real difficulty. Part of the problem I think we have as libertarians is creating the picture of how our kind of society would work. That's where we probably fall down the most. And, we need people kind of akin to Ronald Reagan who can kind of paint,
that vision thing, you talking about
who can
vision.
paint pictures of the way a just and decent society would really be, not these kind of liberal images of a status society.
I think you can't. It's not a package deal. You don't sell someone that from going from the current state of affairs where the government sucks down nearly half of the GNP to where there isn't any at all.
Right.
Obviously, we're going through stages, and that's why I try and work that's why I work with the Libertarian Party. Sometimes people say, well, gee, if you don't want any government, why do you bother voting? Why do you? So, well, because I want to live in a society. I don't want to just talk about what how I want to live. I want to try and make it real. Chances are I'm not going to get the whole way there, but if I start with this as my goal and work hard at it, I might get part of the way. Mm-hmm. And any bit of government reduction is going to make, I think, all our lives better. And hopefully, each little bit of government that we do eliminate shows people that, wow, hey, this works better without government. They'll be a little more willing to try something else without government. Say, well, look, why don't we just get rid of the mandatory nature? Why can't we just say to people, if you want to have your disputes resolved in the government court, fine. If you want to have them resolved in a private arbitration, we'll let you do that. And for now, in the immediate of that situation, you might still have to kick in a little bit of money to the court, to the government court system. But and you say, well, all right, if these people offer enough of an advantage, I'll do it. You let time that builds that, sort of private arbitration, and then you can move it to where the government courts are now voluntarily funded, and if they happen to compete well, great. If they don't, too bad. The good stuff rises to the top. It's not a kind of thing that we sell all at once.
Right.
There was one quote, and I think I can remember it, by William Godwin. And he said the government is an evil, and at best it's a necessary evil. Let's see, I'm starting to mix my Washington and Godwin quotes here. How does that go? He says something about government is at best a necessary evil. Oh man,
Well, I'll tell you what.
No, I can't remember now. Damn it!
The show, and we'll
add it on the thing because it's there.
Have it scroll across the bottom.
Yeah, right. Yeah, we'll have it scrolling across the bottom right now.
Okay. Government is an evil, and
at best it's a necessary.
No. Now you're going to get me screwed up again, thinking of that's George Washington. At best,
You're traipsing on the line, is this because it's scrolling across the screen right now?
Yeah. We're not going to be able to get it. People think I'm reading. So
yeah, very poorly.
I can't read backwards from right to left. Damn it! Government schools for you. But he says government is an evil, and while it may seem a necessary evil for the present, it behooves us as the friends of reason and the human mind to admit as little of it as possible, and in the consequence of the illumination of the human mind to reflect on whether that little may not hereafter be diminished. So basically, government is evil. Let's eliminate as much of it as we can, and then as we figure out ways to get rid of that little bit less, let's do it. That makes a more perfect union in my thinking.
It's, like you were saying, it's all going to take steps. People now, they get there's all kinds of different social programs that people can get, and they don't realize. I said this yesterday. They don't realize where it's coming from. Oh, it's coming from the government, but they don't realize that that's taken from somebody else to give it to them. Yeah.
They ought to call it like Carl Spangler's cheese, is what they ought to say.
They're complicit in stealing.
Yeah, the classic line when I talk to people more often than not when I say taxation is theft is, well, I don't think of it that way. And then my answer is always, isn't that convenient?
Yeah. Well, I think the Earth is flat. Does that make it so?
Yeah.
I mean,
it does if you're a dodo. I mean,
no, and I think that's make it. Does reality?
Well, it makes it so for
them. No, it makes you think it's so. It doesn't make it so. I can think that you're floating 6 feet above the floor.
Yes.
But we have videotape here. It's going to show. It's going to show. Yeah, quite obviously that ain't so.
My only point is that in the people's minds, if you think something long enough, I mean, for all I know, O.J. Simpson at this point has convinced himself that he really didn't do it. And I think people with respect to, I understand it still doesn't make it, that's what actually is, but they've deluded themselves into creating that reality for themselves.
I just thought that would be another good lunch.
Okay.
I wouldn't have much to say on that because I've never paid much attention.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I never paid much attention at all to that. I think the most I ever paid attention to that whole trial was when they started talking about the Fourth Amendment issues. And can they just go into his house and look for evidence like that? And I'm thinking, well, yeah, gee, you've been paying attention back, circa mid '80s, and whenever the anti-drug hysteria was sweeping Congress, you'd have found yes, we kind of quietly got rid of those requirements that they have warrants and reasonable. Probable cause, all that kind of stuff. That's taken quite a back seat.
So in your ideal vision of how people would interact with one another and how government really would play no role in that, what would you see all these interactions being?
How would I see?
What do you think people would do?
I can't possibly tell you how things are going to be. That's exactly why I don't want government, because I don't think government, the people that run it, can see any better all the possible ways that things could interact.
Tell us what the Internet's going to look like in 5 years.
Exactly.
No, I'm just curious.
How could it work?
With respect to drug use, buying sex or not,
I suspect that it would be much. I would think that it would be less. Maybe it's close to what it is now.
Well,
I don't honestly believe that the government's war on drugs stops many people from using drugs. The difference is that when people use drugs, we would have
a lot of positive outcomes, though.
I would suggest that, we definitely wouldn't have the drive-by shootings over drug turf, because if you wanted to sell drugs, you'd simply buy a piece of property and sell drugs there.
And if your neighbors didn't like it, they could pick at you or whatever.
Well, and the thing is it's say there's a certain amount of commercial real estate in the downtown area. Now the person that has a building is going to want to sell it for for as much as it's worth. Now, if I want to open up a store that's going to generate a lot of money, say I want to sell, Christmas trinkets, and judging from some of these
trinkets,
there's probably a lot more people willing to spend more money on Christmas trinkets than they may well be willing to spend on, a legal drug that they could grow at their own house. So the owner of the business that wants to sell something that's more profitable can offer the owner of this place that they want to have a business at more money. Yeah. So then that means that if the people that would like to use what are currently illegal drugs are still in the minority like they are today, they're not going to generate the kind of money. You're not going to see John's Drugs, like buying up like a quarter of the downtown area, and that's all you see. I mean,
right,
pot, weed, crack, right here. I mean,
get it here.
It's just exactly. It's just not going to be quite that that prevalent. At least it's going to only be as prevalent as the people that are willing to spend money to buy it. Are willing to do. And
I was just thinking another.
So what do you think, Mike?
Well, just another example of a free market, voluntary way of restricting property use, restrictive covenants. They're voluntary inherently. You can. One book I read on property rights, probably the last book I read actually, gave the example that he had a home in the Rockies, a gorgeous view, and he had a neighbor just a little bit down the road from him, and that he knew if he'd build a second story to his house, that it would really disrupt his views. So he made an agreement with his neighbor. He paid him like $10,000 to put a covenant in his deed that they would never build above a certain height, because it was worth it to him to do that. And the other neighbor had no intention in the short run, and if he ever sells his house, that's going to encumber the future purchasers who would know about that in advance. And I mean, we have covenants in most states anyway, to some extent, but we've tended to go the route of zoning because it's kind of easier and lazier for a minority of people to impose their will on the rest of people.
It's easier to wait and see what you might want to do later and then change it, instead of having to rely on contracts.
On the argument that it wouldn't work otherwise. I mean, it never would have occurred to people, 50, 80 years ago that this is the way you have to organize things, because today, even in Houston, Texas, they have no zoning in Houston. I mean, it's kind of a, little big town. It's not some backwater town. And they've never had zoning. They rely upon restrictive covenants to keep industry here and residential there. But the other thing with zoning is that they want to keep everything separate, and mixed use of property has some value. I mean, in any residential neighborhood, it's pretty much empty during the day. I mean, it's like, criminals, come on in. And with some mixed use, that creates more traffic and creates inherently a little bit more security in some ways. So, but that's for people to work out.
Well, another thing with the whole drug war the way it is now, is it creating more use? Like the whole you can't do it because it's illegal thing? I mean,
well, certainly there's that psychological element, especially among teenagers, that, hey, this is the forbidden fruit, let's do it. But that would probably exist with or without the law, because their parents might not want them to use it as well.
Right, and they're the ones who should be watching.
Agreed. I mean...
Well, it depends, though. I think it depends how your parent attacks it. If you just basically, from the time your kid grows up, if you bought a copy of the DARE manual and use that to tell your kid about drugs,
right,
and then another parent, who would, in a similar situation, talk to their kid a little bit more intelligently. Not that I'm saying that DARE is necessarily unintelligent, but anything that comes from the brainchild of Daryl Gates, I find to be a little bit questionable. I think that if you told your kid, instead of saying drugs are bad, drugs are evil, you can't use drugs, drugs will kill you. If you told them, well, look, first of all, drugs are different. Some drugs are great, some drugs aren't. Some drugs are legal, some drugs aren't. Now, the situation would be a little different now. All drugs are legal, some drugs are good, some drugs, obviously you go to the doctor, they might give you an aspirin for a headache, but they'll tell you that heroin's a little overkill. And I suspect that reasoning will still hold true. People will find the right tool for the right job. Heroin's a great tool if you want to numb incredible pain,
right?
Or you want to get incredibly blotto. So, and the class of people that want to do either is, hopefully low. Hopefully not everyone wants to go out and get completely oblivious to the world around them. Hopefully the world offers enough that they don't feel the need to spend it all in a drug-induced dream state. Hopefully the world that we can all live in is good enough, and that maybe if you use heroin, you'll moderate your use, and keep it for Friday nights or something, when there's nothing on TV.
I often wonder if there's a relationship between the fact that, the kind of drug use we have today goes with a society that half of its resources go to government versus, 100 years ago, when 10% of the society's resources went to government and drug use was a lot lower. And I think because the conditioning and mind numbing that goes on in schools, public schools, government schools, I think has a lot to do with the sense of hopelessness and dead end that.
But Holland disproves that, though. Holland has lower drug use rates in every category than we do, and they're much more socialist. Yeah. And they have much more government. I mean, they had I saw a video, and I wish it were so. I mean, I would love to make that argument, but yeah, it's not borne out in the in looking at what they do in Holland.
But what's their relative drug use now versus? To
watch is it less than what it was?
In Europe, they've always been socialists. Virtually in modern history, they've always lived under some form of authoritarian government. When they became democratized.
But how can you say that when in Holland you're allowed to? There's things you're allowed to do. You're not allowed to do here. In Germany, you're allowed to do 250 miles an hour on the highway. Each country. Each country has.
I'm talking about their forms of government. I mean, before they were democracies, they were monarchies. And I think the difference between Europeans and Americans psychologically is that Americans aren't ruled by anybody psychologically, whereas Europeans are used to being ruled by somebody. Even now it's a democracy. It's somebody
Still,
out there.
yeah.
They need that idea of a leader. Like Germany's a great example. But
we have that.
No, I think there's people everywhere.
We're moving that direction, but I think the core idea of an American is a core American to me, a classic American is somebody who will not be ruled by another person.
Anti-authoritarian.
Anti-authoritarian.
Seem to have that streak going through us.
That is the essential core nature of an American.
So I win. I'm the biggest American on the show. I don't want to be ruled by anybody, not even one bureaucrat in Washington.
And I think Europeans and other people in the world to some extent, but Europeans, because I got to know a lot of European history, I think they're just all too comfortable with a big, powerful group ruling them.
Well, Mike, aren't you a European?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you're hence that control thing.
But I was
anti-authoritarian Europeans. Well, let's go. Let's get
I was born in England, but I was raised in this country virtually all my life. So, and my parents have obviously English values, if you knew them. My
now, do they also have like that English sense of humor, like they laugh at silly things and pratfalls?
My dad has a very unique sense of humor, but a very independent mode of thought. I mean, he was in a union, and he was totally different from all the other union guys. And anyway, I didn't get into my.
You digress.
One thing about the kind of what Todd was going on about the drug.
You're gonna have to bring it back to the drugs on that beverage of yours there, Mike.
Right.
My parents, as I was growing up, they gave me, a little beer here and there, whatever. And
look what happened to you.
Yeah, I know. Look at me.
You got that
German background
on your chin.
Yeah, but my mom's German. When I first tell people that, they're like, "What?" They're like, and I say my mom's German. They're like, "Oh, that's okay." They don't have a problem with it then. But, there were times when I was with people who their parents didn't let them have anything, and they were going crazy, and I was just like, "What?" I didn't need it.
Not quite as big a deal.
So what have we learned from this radical anarcho-capitalist?
I know that at heart I'm an anarchist, but I just it's going to take me a while to get there.
You're looking for some insurance yet, so we'll sell it off piece by piece, and then we'll see. We'll see how it works. If this works, we'll go on from there.
Very good.